The old stone castle stood at the edge of the northern woods, where fog never fully left the ground, and the trees grew so close together that sunlight had to fight its way through in thin silver threads. People in the nearby villages called it the Ashworth Keep, though most just called it his place, because saying his name out loud felt like inviting trouble. Cale Ashworth was the alpha king of the northern packs. He was not the kind of king who smiled at feasts or waved from balconies. He ruled through silence and weight, through the simple fact that when he entered a room, every wolf in it lowered their eyes without being told to. His temper was legend. His loneliness was not talked about, because no one dared bring it up, and because most people who worked in his castle didn't stay long enough to notice it. There was a saying among the staff, passed quietly from one nervous new hire to the next: no woman lasts more than a week near the king. Some said it was his temper. Some said his wolf was too close to the surface, always watching, always ready to snap. Others whispered that he did it on purpose, that he liked being alone, that he built a wall around himself brick by brick, until no one could get close enough to matter. Nobody knew the real reason he pushed people away. Not even the pack elders who had watched him grow from a snarling pup into a king wearing armor like a second skin. Mira Voss did not know any of this when she signed her name on the hiring papers. She was 24 years old, tired in the way that settles into your bones after months of it, the kind of tired that no amount of sleep can fix because it isn't really about sleep. She worked 3 jobs before this one: a bakery in the mornings, a laundry service in the afternoons, and cleaning offices at night when the buildings were empty and cold. She did all this because her younger brother, Devlin, was in a hospital 2 counties away, and hospitals did not care how tired a person was. They only cared about money. The agency that placed her at the Ashworth Keep didn't tell her much. They said the pay was good. They said the position was in the East Wing. They did not mention the king's temper, or his wolf, or the fact that 3 maids before her had quit within days, one of them reportedly running out the front gate without her coat. Mira found out about the Cale curse on her very first day, from an older maid named Talia, who had survived nearly 2 years in the castle by mastering the art of never being seen. "Keep your eyes down," Talia told her, folding linens with quick, practiced hands. "Don't speak unless he speaks first. And if he raises his voice, don't run. Running makes it worse. It's like—" She paused, searching for the right words. "It's like waving a red flag at a bull that's already annoyed." Mira nodded, though the warning barely registered. She had bigger things pressing on her mind. Devlin's surgery was scheduled in 6 weeks, and the hospital bill sat in her bag like a stone she carried everywhere, its weight increasing with every day that passed. She met Cale on her 3rd day. She was dusting the long gallery on the 2nd floor, moving slowly because her body ached from lack of sleep, when the door at the far end slammed open and he walked in like a storm that had decided to take human shape. He was tall in a way that made the room feel smaller, with shoulders that looked like they carried something heavier than armor, and eyes the color of wet slate, gray, but with a depth that made you feel like you were looking down into water you couldn't see the bottom of. He was in the middle of an argument with someone Mira didn't recognize, an older wolf in a dark coat who kept his voice low and urgent. Cale's voice was not low. It cracked through the gallery like a whip. "I don't care what the elders think," he snapped. "I make the decisions in this pack, not them." The older man said something Mira couldn't hear, something that made Cale's jaw tighten. "Then let them try," Cale said, and there was something under his voice now, something low and rough that didn't sound entirely human. The air in the gallery seemed to grow heavier, pressing down, the way it does right before a storm breaks. Mira kept dusting. She didn't mean to be brave. She wasn't being brave. She was simply too exhausted to summon the fear that everyone else in this castle seemed to produce so easily. Her body had used up its supply of fear a long time ago, somewhere between the 2nd hospital bill and the 3rd night shift in a row. What was left in her now was just a kind of hollow steadiness, the emptiness of someone running on fumes. Cale noticed her. He noticed her the way a wolf notices the one animal in the forest that doesn't run. He stopped mid-sentence. The older wolf in the dark coat also stopped, following his gaze, confused. Mira felt the silence settle over the gallery, but she didn't look up. She kept working the cloth over the old wooden banister, one slow circle after another, because if she stopped, she thought she might just fall asleep standing there. "You," Cale said. Mira looked up then, because it would have been strange not to. His eyes were fixed on her, and there was something in them she couldn't name. Not anger, something closer to confusion, like he'd expected a particular reaction and hadn't gotten it. "Yes, my lord," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised even her. "Do you know who I am?" "You're the king," she said simply. "I was told not to look you in the eye, but I forgot, and I'm sorry, but I really am too tired to remember all the rules today." The older wolf in the dark coat made a small, strangled sound, something between a cough and a warning. Mira thought perhaps she had said the wrong thing. She braced herself for the storm everyone had warned her about. But Cale didn't shout. His eyebrows drew together, and for one long moment he simply looked at her, the way someone looks at a puzzle piece that doesn't seem to belong to the picture they're building, but somehow fits anyway. "Get some rest," he said finally, and turned back to the older wolf as if nothing had happened, resuming their argument in a lower voice as they walked out of the gallery. Mira stood there for a moment, duster in hand, wondering if she had imagined the whole thing. She hadn't. That night, Cale found himself thinking about her while he sat alone in his study, a room lined with old books that he never had time to read and a fireplace that never quite warmed the whole space. His wolf was restless in a way it hadn't been in years, not aggressive, not hungry, just alert, the way an animal gets when it catches a scent it doesn't recognize but knows it should remember. He told himself it was suspicion. No one was unafraid of him without a reason. People feared him because it kept them safe, because fear was a boundary that protected both sides. A person who didn't fear him was either foolish or hiding something, and he had learned, through years of betrayal and loss he didn't like to think about, that foolish people rarely lasted long in his world, and the ones hiding something were far more dangerous. He decided he would keep an eye on the new maid, just to understand her, just to be careful. That was the story he told himself, anyway. Over the next 2 weeks, Cale found reasons to be in places Mira happened to be. He told himself each time that it was coincidence, or duty, or curiosity about a possible threat. He walked through the East Wing more often than he used to. He lingered in the library longer than his reading required. He found himself listening for the particular rhythm of her footsteps, light and quick despite the tiredness that seemed to follow her everywhere. Mira, for her part, barely noticed him at first. She was too busy running calculations in her head. How many hours until her next shift at the bakery? How many days until Devlin's surgery? How much money she still needed to save? The castle work was hard, but it paid well, and the exhaustion it brought was at least honest exhaustion, not the kind that came from worrying about things she couldn't control. She started falling asleep in strange places. It happened first in the small sitting room off the kitchen, where she sat down for what she thought would be a 5-minute break, and woke up 40 minutes later with a crick in her neck, and Talia gently shaking her shoulder, whispering that the head housekeeper was making rounds. It happened again in the laundry room, standing at the folding table, her body simply giving out mid-fold, her forehead resting against a stack of warm towels for who knows how long, before she jolted awake in a panic. The third time, it happened in the library. She had gone there to dust the high shelves, standing on a small step stool with a cloth in one hand, and the late afternoon light coming through the tall windows was warm and golden and impossibly soft. She told herself she would just sit for a moment on the window seat, just to rest her legs. She was asleep before she finished the thought. Cale found her there an hour later. He had come to the library for a book he didn't actually need, if he was honest with himself, which he rarely was these days when it came to the reasons behind his own movements. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her curled into the corner of the window seat, knees pulled up, one arm tucked under her head, the duster still loosely held in her other hand, as if she had simply run out of energy mid-motion, like a machine that had stopped without being turned off. The golden light fell across her face, and for a moment Cale simply stood there, not moving, not breathing the way he usually forced himself to breathe, controlled, measured, a king's breath. His wolf, always restless around other people, always watchful, always ready, went quiet. It was the first time in longer than he could remember that his wolf had gone quiet around another living person. He should have woken her. That would have been the reasonable thing, the expected thing, the thing a king does when he finds a servant sleeping on the job. He could have called for Talia. He could have cleared his throat loudly and let his presence do the rest. Instead, he found himself crossing the room, his boots silent on the old rug, and standing over her, looking down at the dark circles under her eyes that even sleep couldn't smooth away, at the small furrow between her brows that suggested even her dreams weren't peaceful. He didn't understand what he was feeling. He only understood that he didn't want to disturb it. He picked her up. It was not a decision that came from his mind. It came from somewhere lower, somewhere older, the part of him that answered to instinct before it answered to crowns or rules, or the careful walls he had built around himself for 30 years. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, and the lightness of her, the way her body simply folded into him without resistance because she was too deeply asleep to resist, did something to his chest that he had no name for. He carried her to the couch near the fireplace, the one with the deep cushions that no one ever used, because the room was rarely occupied at this hour. He sat down, and instead of setting her beside him, he found that his arms simply did not want to let go, so he didn't let go. He sat there with her, the fire cracking softly, the last of the golden afternoon light fading into the blue of early evening, and for the first time in years, Cale Ashworth felt something in his chest loosen, not vanish, not heal, just loosen, the way a fist unclenches after holding tension for so long that the muscles have forgotten how to be soft. His wolf, quiet and still, settled deeper into that stillness, recognizing something it did not yet have a word for. Cale didn't have a word for it either. He only had the weight of her against his chest and the strange, unfamiliar peace of not being alone in a room for once. He stayed like that for nearly 2 hours. When Mira finally stirred, blinking awake in confusion, she found herself looking up into gray eyes that were far too close and far too warm for a man everyone described as cold. She sat up so fast she nearly fell off the couch. "My lord, I'm so sorry. I don't know how You were tired," Cale said simply, as if that explained everything, as if kings carried exhausted servants to couches all the time, and there was nothing at all unusual about it. Mira stared at him, waiting for the anger everyone had warned her about, waiting for the storm. "It didn't come. You should sleep at night," he said, "not standing on step stools." "I know," she said, and something in her voice cracked slightly, just slightly, enough that Cale noticed it the way he noticed everything about her now. "I just don't have very many nights that are mine." He didn't ask what she meant, not yet, but he filed it away, the way he filed away everything about her, building a picture piece by piece, without fully understanding why he was building it at all. Word travels fast in a castle full of wolves who can smell secrets before they're spoken aloud. By the next morning, the story had already changed shape 3 times as it passed from mouth to mouth. The maid fell asleep in the king's arms. The king carried her through the halls. The king sat with her by the fire for hours and didn't let anyone near the library. Some versions had her fainting. Some versions had him growling at anyone who came close. All versions ended with the same unbelievable detail, that the king, who could not stand to be near another person for longer than a conversation required, had held on to someone and hadn't wanted to stop. The pack elders heard the story before lunch. Elder Rovan Thane, the oldest and most severe of them, a wolf who had served under Cale's father and had never fully trusted the son, called for a private meeting that same evening. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "You let a human near your wolf," he said, the moment the study door closed. "Do you understand what that means?" "I understand it means nothing," Cale said, though even to his own ears, the words sounded thin. "It means everything," Rovan snapped. "An Alpha King's wolf does not go still around just anyone. It has been 30 years, Cale, 30 years since anyone has seen your wolf settle in front of another living soul. And now a maid, a human, and you're telling me it means nothing?" Kale said nothing, because he didn't have an answer that wouldn't reveal more than he wanted to. This is either a bonding, Rovan continued, quieter now but no less severe, or it is a liability that will be used against you the moment your enemies learn of it. Either way, the pack needs to know which it is. You cannot simply carry a servant through the halls and expect no one to notice, no one to ask, no one to use it. She is not a piece to be used, Kale said, and his voice had an edge to it now, an edge that made even Rovan pause. Then protect her, Rovan said simply. Because right now, you are not protecting anyone, you are only exposing her. The words sat heavy in Kale's chest long after Rovan left the room. Mira heard the rumors too, of course. It was impossible not to. Talia told her in a rush of worried whispers the next morning, her hands shaking slightly as she folded linens far too fast. They're saying things, Talia said, about you and the king, about his wolf. Mira, this isn't safe. When wolves talk about bonds and wolves settling, they mean something serious. This isn't gossip you can just laugh off. Nothing happened, Mira said, though her cheeks were warm. I fell asleep. That's all. I was exhausted, and I fell asleep, and he was kind enough not to wake me up and shout at me for it. Kind, Talia repeated, like the word itself was strange in her mouth when applied to the king. Mira, he doesn't do kind, he does tolerate. Sometimes, if you're lucky, he doesn't do kind. Mira didn't know how to explain what she had felt when she woke up in his arms. Not fear, which was what she had expected, what everyone had trained her to expect, but something like safety, something unfamiliar and confusing that she didn't have time to examine because her life had no room in it for confusion that wasn't about hospital bills. She decided the simplest thing to do was quit before the rumors grew into something she couldn't control. She found Kale in his study that evening, working up the courage during the long walk down the East Wing corridor, rehearsing words that all sounded wrong the moment she tried them out in her head. My lord, she said, standing stiffly in the doorway, I think it's best if I resign my position. Kale looked up from the papers on his desk, and something in his face shifted, not anger, but something closer to alarm, quickly hidden behind the careful stillness he wore like armor. Why, he said. It wasn't really a question. It came out flat, almost demanding. The rumors, Mira said. They're not fair to you. You're the king. You shouldn't have people talking about you because a tired maid fell asleep somewhere she shouldn't have. The rumors aren't your fault. It doesn't matter whose fault they are. They exist because of something I did. I should go before it becomes worse for you. Kale stood up from his desk, and for a moment Mira thought he might simply agree, might let her walk away the way every other reasonable person in his life had learned to do when he grew quiet and distant. Instead, he crossed the room, stopping a few feet from her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to meet his eyes. Stay, he said. It was such a simple word, but Mira could see, in the tightness around his eyes, that it had cost him something to say it. Kings did not ask people to stay. Kings dismissed people, or ignored them, or let them leave without comment. Kale Ashworth had never, in 30 years of ruling, asked anyone to stay. Why? Mira said, echoing his own question back at him. He didn't have an answer that made sense, not one he was ready to say out loud. So he said the only thing he was certain of, because I don't want you to go. Mira felt something in her chest crack slightly, the way ice cracks on a lake in early spring, not breaking all the way through, but enough to let a little warmth seep in. She stayed, but staying didn't solve the deeper problem sitting in her bag like a stone, the hospital bill for Devlin's surgery, which arrived formally that same week, thick with numbers that made her stomach drop every time she looked at it. She had saved what she could from 3 jobs and now 1 castle position, but it wasn't enough. It was never quite enough, no matter how many hours she gave up, how many nights she spent scrubbing floors instead of sleeping. She didn't tell Kale about the bill. She didn't tell anyone. She simply carried it, the way she had learned to carry everything, quietly and without complaint, because complaining didn't pay hospital bills, and neither did self-pity. But Kale noticed things now. He had built his entire reign on noticing things, the smallest shift in a rival's posture before a challenge, the flicker in an ally's eyes before a betrayal. He noticed the new tightness around Mira's mouth, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was watching, the letter she kept folded and refolded in her apron pocket until the creases had worn the paper thin. He had someone look into it, quietly, carefully. Not out of suspicion this time, but out of something closer to concern, though he still refused to call it by its proper name, even in the privacy of his own thoughts. When he learned about Devlin, about the surgery, about the mountain of debt Mira had been climbing alone for months, something in him settled into a decision he didn't need to think twice about. He paid the bill. He didn't make an announcement of it. He didn't ask for anything in return. He simply had it handled, quietly, the way a person waters a plant they've decided is worth keeping alive, without making a ceremony out of the act. Mira found out 3 days later, when the hospital sent a confirmation letter stating that the account had been settled in full. She read the letter twice, then a third time, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed in the small servants' quarters, her hands shaking, for an entirely different reason than exhaustion. She found Cale in the library that evening, the same library where everything had started. "You paid it," she said, before she had even fully stepped into the room. "The surgery, you paid all of it." Cale didn't look up from the book in his hands, though Mira suspected he hadn't actually been reading a single word of it. "You needed it handled," he said, "so I handled it." "That's not, you can't just—" Mira stopped, because there weren't words that fit the size of what she was feeling. She had spent months preparing herself to fight the world for every single coin, and here was a man who had simply removed the fight from her hands without asking for a single thing back. "I don't want anything from you," Cale said, finally looking up, as if he'd heard the question she hadn't asked. "I'm not buying anything. I just didn't want you carrying that alone anymore." It was the plainness of it that undid her. Not the crown, not the castle, or the power, or the fear that made grown wolves lower their eyes when he entered a room. Just the plainness of a kindness given without conditions, the simple fact that someone had looked at her struggling and decided, without needing credit for it, to lift some of the weight. She sat down across from him, and for the first time since arriving at the castle, she let herself cry, not from sadness but from the strange relief of finally putting something down. Cale didn't say anything. He simply sat with her while she cried, the way he had sat with her that first afternoon in the library, patient and steady, his presence a kind of quiet anchor she hadn't known she needed. Not everyone in the castle saw it that way. Elder Rovan Thane heard about the paid hospital bill within a day, and it was, in his mind, the final piece of proof he needed. A king who paid a servant's debts without asking for anything in return was not simply curious about a human, he was attached. And an attachment like that, in Rovan's experience, was a crack in the foundation that enemies would eventually find and widen until the whole structure came down. He called for a formal gathering of the pack elders, a rare and serious event that hadn't happened since Cale's coronation. Cale knew, the moment the summons arrived, what it was about. The gathering hall was cold, despite the fire burning in its enormous hearth. Cold in the way that rooms get when the people inside them are afraid and trying not to show it. The elders sat in a half-circle, Rovan at the center, his expression carved from stone. "We are here," Rovan announced, "to discuss the fitness of our king to continue leading unchallenged." A murmur ran through the small gathered crowd, pack members who had been allowed to witness, servants pressed against the back walls, Talia among them, her eyes wide with worry. "You claim I am unfit," Cale said, his voice level, though Mira, watching from the doorway where she had been told to remain out of sight and had disobeyed anyway, could see the tension coiled in his shoulders. "I claim your control is slipping," Rovan corrected. "You have allowed a human, a servant, into a place no one has been allowed in 30 years. You have paid her debts. You have carried her through these halls in full view of the staff. This is not the behavior of a king in control of himself. This is the behavior of a wolf who has lost his grip." "And if I have," Cale said, and the room went very still. Rovan blinked, clearly not expecting the question to be met with anything other than denial. Then you are unfit to lead a pack that requires strength and discipline above all else. Kale stood. He did not raise his voice, though everyone in the room seemed to lean forward slightly, as if his stillness carried more weight than shouting ever could. For 30 years, he said, I have led this pack by making sure nothing got close enough to hurt me. No woman stayed, no friend lasted. I built walls so tall that even my own wolf forgot what it felt like to rest. You called that strength, I called it survival, but it was never strength, it was exhaustion pretending to be control. He looked toward the doorway, toward Mira, who stood frozen, unsure if she was allowed to be witnessed. My wolf didn't go still around her because it was weak, Kale continued, his voice steady even as something rawer moved beneath it. It went still because, for the first time in 30 years, it was finally allowed to rest. That is not a crack in the foundation, Rovan. That is the foundation finally being built on something solid, instead of fear. The hall was silent. Rovan's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, no one moved, no one breathed, waiting to see which way the old elder would turn, whether this would end in challenge or in something else entirely. Then, slowly, Rovan sat back down. A king who burns himself into ash trying to prove he needs no one, Rovan said quietly, is a king who eventually has nothing left to give his pack. Perhaps, he added, and the word seemed to cost him effort, there is wisdom in rest, even for kings. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't full acceptance either. But it was enough for the challenge to dissolve quietly into the cold air of the hall, enough for the gathered crowd to exhale collectively, enough for Talia to grip Mira's hand tightly at the back of the room. The pack, watching, understood something that day that Rovan himself perhaps only half understood. A king who could rest, who could let someone else carry a little of his weight, was a king less likely to burn out and take the whole pack down with him in the process. Life at the castle did not transform overnight into something soft and easy. Kale still had a temper. He still barked orders when he was frustrated, still paced his study late into the night when the weight of ruling pressed down too hard. Mira still worked long hours, still carried the quiet exhaustion of a life built on hard work rather than luck. But something had shifted, and it showed in small ways. Kale started eating dinner in the smaller dining room instead of the enormous, echoing hall meant for formal occasions, and somehow Mira found herself there too, not as staff serving a meal and leaving, but sitting across from him, sharing simple food and simpler conversation. He asked about Devlin's recovery. She told him, in small pieces over several weeks, about her parents who had passed years ago, about raising Devlin mostly on her own since she was 18, about dreams she'd once had of doing something other than cleaning other people's homes, dreams she'd folded away neatly like the letters she used to carry in her apron pocket. He listened. He didn't try to fix everything, though he fixed what he could. He didn't offer empty comfort. He simply listened, in the steady, patient way that had first drawn her attention that afternoon in the gallery, when she'd been too tired to be afraid of him. Weeks passed, and the castle settled into its own new rhythm, not without its shadows, not without its tensions, but with a warmth that hadn't existed within those stone walls in longer than most of the staff could remember. One evening, months after that first afternoon in the library, Mira found herself back on the same window seat, dusting the same high shelves, the same golden light falling through the same tall windows. She didn't mean to sit down. She didn't mean to close her eyes. Just for a moment, just to rest. She fell asleep anyway. When she woke, it was dark outside, the fire in the hearth crackling softly, and she was no longer on the window seat. She was on the couch, tucked against Kale's chest, his arms settled around her the way it had been that very first time, except now there was no confusion in her when she woke, no startled scramble to apologize. She knew exactly whose arms these were. "You fell asleep again," Kale said quietly, and there was something almost like amusement in his voice now, something that hadn't been there before, something lighter. "I know," Mira murmured, not moving, not wanting to move. "I think I do that on purpose now." Kale's arm tightened slightly around her, not possessive, not demanding, just steady, the way an anchor holds a boat without pulling it under. "Good," he said, Because I've decided I'm keeping you. Mira smiled against his chest, too tired and too content to argue, though she suspected, even in her half-asleep haze, that she wouldn't have argued anyway. The Kale Curse, as the staff had once called it, quietly ended that winter. Not with an announcement, not with a grand ceremony or a declaration shouted from the castle walls, but with something far simpler and far more lasting. It ended the way most curses eventually do, when someone finally stops trying to survive the storm and instead learns to rest inside it. Mira stayed at the castle long after that, not as a maid dusting shelves in the East Wing, though she still liked to visit that library, still liked to sit in that same window seat when the golden afternoon light came slanting through the tall glass. Devlin recovered fully from his surgery and visited often, growing to trust and even like the quiet, serious king who had once terrified an entire staff of servants and now sat patiently through Devlin's endless questions about wolves and pack life without ever once losing his temper. The pack elders, even Rovan in his own gruff way, came to accept what the rest of the castle had already understood, that strength wasn't always about walls and distance and fear. Sometimes it was about finding the one person whose presence didn't feel like a threat, and choosing, deliberately and without apology, to let them stay close. Cale Ashworth ruled for many more years after that winter, and history remembered him as one of the strongest alpha kings the northern packs had ever known. Not because he never softened, but because he finally understood that softening, for the right person, was not weakness at all. It was simply what rest looked like, after 30 years of running. And every so often, late in the afternoon, when the light came slanting gold through the library windows just right, the staff would find their king, in the same corner of the same room, a woman asleep against his chest, and they would quietly close the door behind them, letting the moment stay exactly as it was, undisturbed, unremarkable, entirely his.